Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is John Byrne. He is Professor of Useful Art at Liverpool John Moores University School of Art and Design. His book, Useful Art, looks at how activist artists can change the world. It's an ideal handbook for artists, activists and communities who wish to use art as an activist tool for social change. Welcome to the show, John.
Hiya.
Hi, thanks for joining us. So tell us, first of all, the connection between activism and art.
There's been a long connection between activism and art, really, that goes back over a century, but it's been bubbling up more and more over the last 20 or 30 years. And it's something that's really come to the fore in the useful art movement. So it's both something that has a historical legacy, but it's got something of an urgency now, I guess, especially as we're shifting, unfortunately, towards the right.
And what is the useful art movement?
The useful art movement's really a collaboration of like-minded individuals who see creativity and collaboration and the need for ground-up social change as a form of developing new artworks that can affect real-world change.
Yeah, can you give us some examples?
Yeah, a great example is of a friend and a colleague of mine, Owen Griffiths. He's an artist who works in Wales, and about 11, 12 years ago, he started a short-term project in Swansea called Fetch Fedge. The old Swansea Football Club had been torn down and it literally left a hole in an old working class community. And they applied for a short-term lease to be able to use that land. So they developed allotments and growing spaces around what used to be the centre circle of the old fetch ground. And it developed and developed and developed, and it's still there after 11 years. It's a staple on all kinds of radio and TV networks, but it's had a profound effect as well. It led to one of the first ministers for future social change to be elected as MP for Swansea. So these ground up social projects can really begin to re-empower communities who've been lost to a great extent with all the social shifts and changes that have gone on, and can find ways of combining the skills that they've already had to help themselves and each other.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what I'm sort of, pardon me if I'm being like confused or asking a silly question, but what makes an allotment art? There are allotments all over the place. How has that become art?
Well, it's how you look at it and from what end of the lens. We've got about 100, just about a 200 year, I suppose, if you want to go back way in the West, of understanding what art is, which is largely about objects such as paintings and sculptures. We've got a hardware system, museums and galleries, which are places where we house these. And we have a software as well, which allows us to understand art. We generally tend to think of artists as individuals who have an ability to see what we can't see, and who embed things in art objects that we go in as audiences, read, and the extraction of that is what we see as art. I think what useful art points towards is a kind of future, if you like, for how we might rethink the whole art system, but it also has one foot in a less than 200-year-old history before all of this began to happen. So what we're doing is trying to think of how creativity and forms of collaboration and social change that affect real-world movements and forms of taking back control from the condition of neoliberal occupation is really the art in itself. So it's not just the allotment, it's people working together and combining their creativity to take back what's been lost or stolen.
Yeah. So do you think people are doing this without realising the impact, or do you think it's a case of people wanting to make an impact and therefore going out and doing something?
I think there's probably a degree of both. But I think more and more people are deciding that they want to have a form of impact. There's all kinds of situations now where most of us are increasingly alienated away from using our hands, using craft skills, speaking to neighbours, forming community, using skills that we've had to combine and affect social change. So the useful art movement is really about refinding those skills and ways of communicating to do something from the ground up. And they're often quite deliberate. They're often aimed at very, very local, very micro-specific needs and necessities, things that might need addressing or might need change in a local area or context.
Yeah, I suppose doing something like this is makes a more of a positive impact than standing on the street protesting and things like that. I mean, protests can still work in a positive way, but a lot of protesters tend to get a bad rap as well. So doing something creative, I guess, is a better way of expressing yourself.
It's certainly another way. I mean, if you look at the protests in Minneapolis at the moment, they're really, really necessary. But I think you're right as well. As one of the things that happens often after protests, which power is quite accustomed to, is after a certain point they tend to dissipate. What often happens with useful art projects is some of those needs and necessities cause communities and creatives to get together to form tools for affecting forms of social change. A version of that happened again about 10, 11 years ago in New York, where the artist Tanya Bagheera was working with the Queen's Museum, and instead of putting on an exhibition, she started to form something which became known as the Immigrant Movement International. And that was a loose affiliation of artists, creatives, and it started to attract people from business and law to actually affect some rights for political immigrants and asylum seekers who had no rights whatsoever in New York at the time, and actually shifted law.
Wow, that's fantastic. So as a professor of useful art, what are some of the things that you go through and discuss with your students?
Well, I often start with students being quite mischievous because, like myself, I did a fine art degree a long time ago, further back than I care to remember. And we all have these assumptions about what artists are and what you want to do in the world. And that's great. Ambition and dreaming is something that needs to be sustained, watered, fed and encouraged. But it doesn't take long to actually look at some of the facts about just how long ago it was, and it's literally 200, 250 years ago, that we in the West developed our ideas, as I said before, of what art is or can be. And some of those ideas are great and worth sustaining, but that hardware system of museums and galleries, that software system of understanding what art is, have really maybe hit the buffers now. And there are other things that we can do and think of. And initially, when I talked to that with my students, some of them are a bit, I'm not quite sure of that. I quite like this idea of wanting to be the kind of the artist whose ideas I was brought up with. But also very suddenly, they can really start to see that actually, if the whole way that we envisage art has historically changed, we can be part of another change and we can really affect what could happen in the future. So it's very, very liberating to have those conversations.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I find it fascinating talking about art and what art means to different people and how one person can look at a painting and just be like, I don't get it. Like I could have painted that when I was 6, a lot of the splash paintings absolutely. And things like that you don't understand the skill of it. I struggle with that, to be honest. So I find it fascinating discussing what it means to people and what each particular painting or piece of art can mean to you, and that's different for everybody.
Oh, absolutely. And those struggles that you have and that we all have are often based on the fact that, as I said, we've got a very, very well-established software system for understanding what art can actually be. And it takes quite a lot of time and quite a lot of effort to be able to understand a very top-down notion of what the best of art is. And some of those ideas are fabulous. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But often the result of that is a lot of people feel alienated from art and feel that they just can't understand it and it's not for them. But useful art provides a way of harnessing some of the best ideas we've developed about art and being able to re-engage all kinds of citizens as users, not simply as viewers or observers, and allows people to make art again in a way that can affect real social change in their own environments.
So I bet you get some great ideas coming from the students, do you, when you're talking about this and they start to understand the concept of useful art? Do they come up with some really interesting and wacky ideas of things that they might like to do?
Yeah, they come up with some fantastic stuff. We're talking about individuals who are by their very nature creative, and we're talking about individuals whose systems within which they operate have always given them sort of some very useful guide rails, but starting to talk about useful art and working collaboratively and doing projects like this really takes some of those limitations away from them. So they come up with all sorts of incredible ideas, some of which they change into real businesses. I was only talking with a group of students just before this interview who are on a module with me, and I was mentioning a group of 3 graphic art students a couple of years ago, and they were doing a collaborative module called Transdisciplinary Practice with me, and they wanted to use their graphic skills to develop quite a straightforward project. But when they were having some discussion, they all realised that they had an issue with how little information university students get to navigate their way around specific cities at night. So these 3 women got together and decided to develop a project called Scouse Angels, which would form a template of a toolkit, a nicely designed toolkit, which could be given to students of all ages and all genders and orientations, which might help them navigate that nightlife. And it led them into a collaboration with the student union at my university, the National Student Union, and also Liverpool Police.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great idea.
Yeah, and there's countless ideas like that. I often say, which, I'm showing my age here, but when students start to develop collaborative useful art projects, it's like giving them the opportunity to be in a band. They're able to really do something in the world and have an immediate effect and start to navigate their way through it and to connect with people and to associate with people and to make things happen, not just to do something that's academic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if people want to find out more about useful art, that's the title of the book, Useful Art, How Activist Artists Can Change the World. It's available wherever you get your books from, and it's by John Byrne, who we've been chatting with. John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much too. It's great to talk.